So good afternoon. Welcome. I know some people are just joining this session, so we're going to introduce things so that people can get their footing and come and join us. Welcome to the ALD Connect Bootcamp for Cerebral ALD families. And welcome to this session, which is the fourth session. So if you've been watching this live all day, this is your fourth Zoom. Congratulations. If you're watching a recording of this later, welcome. Consider checking out some of the other previous sessions. This session is called Taking Care of the Caregivers. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am that we have Blyth Lord from the Courageous Parents Network and Laura Will, who has a website, the Dragon Mom's Word, a dragonmomswords.com, that you should check out as a rare disease parent, and also with the Courageous Parents Network. We're also super grateful in general for today's programming and for our sponsor, Bluebird Bio, without whom today's program would not be possible. I know I have to get through this, so thank you for bearing with me. It's our regular standard webinar disclaimer. This webinar is for informational purposes only. The discussion is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment if you are a family member or ill, or if you suspect that you and a family member are ill, please seek medical attention immediately. ALD Connect does not recommend or endorse any specific physicians, treatments, procedures, or products, even though they may be mentioned on this webinar. So without further ado, thank you so much, Blyth and Laura, and for this much needed topic. I will let you know that in every single one of the previous sessions today, this topic has come up. And so we're just so grateful for any input and insights you may share. So thank you.
Well, it is our pleasure to be here. I am Blyth Lord, founder of Courageous Parents Network, and this topic is very near and dear to my heart as well. I think coming out of the year that we've all just had, I think we have all a new appreciation for what it means to be inside our heads and our hearts and our homes and our bodies and our families. And so while I come to you as a rare disease mom myself, and I'll share with you my story, I also am newly reminded of how important it is to be aware of how you're feeling and to actually not just to pay attention to it, but to do something about it. And I am delighted that Laura Will is here with me to talk about this because I think she is an exceptional example of someone who has decided very intentionally and early on to pay attention to this and has benefited from it. Let me go. I need to next slide. I am the founder of Courageous Parents Network, and in my work, I have had the privilege to talk with dozens and dozens and dozens of parents and providers, but particularly parents caring for children who are living with serious conditions, some of which are life-limiting. Some of which are simply medical complexity, and some of them are conditions for which the prognosis is uncertain. So for all of these parents, they are dealing with difficult issues, they are grieving, they are experiencing anticipatory grief, they are wrestling with all sorts of things, and their goal, of course, as any parent feels, is to be the best parent they can possibly be for their child, and for their other children, if they have other children, probably, hopefully, if they are in a partnership, or it's to stay in that relationship as well, or to have that to be healthy. And oftentimes, the last thing they are thinking about is themselves. But as I'm sure you've all heard already today, as we know from the airplane, although it's been a while since I've been on one of these planes and heard this message, you have to put your oxygen mask on first if you are going to take care of the other people. But it is interesting on Courageous Parents Network, people in my travels, people just don't talk about it. The newly diagnosed families and the families who've been in it for a little while, but not a long while, don't typically talk about taking care of themselves. Um, and when I ask them about it, they just sort of poo-poo it away, which is one of the reasons I think Laura it's is exceptional, and you'll hear how she frames it and thinks about it in a way that's very inviting, and accessible. And and yet when I talk to parents of children who have died, they always talk about how they wish they had taken better care of themselves. So it is upon reflection that they realize that they were not tending to themselves, um, and their and so I think that's an important thing to flag. I love this quote that I came across in from a doctor who had it in a presentation he was giving on palliative care. Serious illness can be described as a spiritual event that grasps persons by the soul as well as by the body and disturbs both. And if you, I think if, we sit with this for a moment, we can feel the truth of it. And by spiritual event, we don't mean having to do with faith, tradition, or religion, but just the spirit, how we are in our hearts and how we feel in our spirits, our inner spirits, is affected when someone we love is struggling, and someone we love is sick. And so our health and our well-being means tending to that spiritual part of ourselves. My own personal experience with this is that I am a rare mom. My daughter Cameron, who's there on the right. I realize I'm fast forwarding. I may be speaking too quickly to the slides, and you haven't caught up. So if some of this is not making sense because I'm talking to something that you're not seeing, I apologize. The delay on Zoom is a little hard for you guys, and I'm sorry that I'm not taking that into account as I move forward. But I think now you are seeing this picture with my daughter Cameron there on the right, and my nephew Hayden there in red below. Both my nephew and my daughter Hayden were diagnosed with infantile Tay-Sachs, which is a lysosomal storage disease, within 2 weeks of each other. It's very unusual for children to be diagnosed as early as my daughter was. She was not quite 6 months, but it is because her first cousin was diagnosed, and the fathers are identical twins. My husband is there on the right in the brown jacket next to me in the brown jacket. His identical twin, Tim, is there in blue, who married my roommate from college, there in green. And because the fathers were both carriers, identical twins, I assumed my husband was a carrier, and they have a mutation that had never been seen before. But my grandmother is of Ashkenazi Jewish descent, which is one of the known carrier pools for Tay-Sachs. And I went and got tested, and it turned out that I was in fact a carrier. We had my daughter tested, and we found out 2 weeks after we found out about my nephew, we found out that my daughter, who had just been given a clean, beautiful, glowing bill of health from her pediatrician, we found out that she too had infantile Tay-Sachs, for which there is no treatment or cure still yet. We are on the cusp of clinical gene therapy clinical trials, but certainly in 1999, there was nothing. And so we were 4 parents in one family who had learned together, basically, that our children would die sometime in their early childhood. Hayden died 5 months before my daughter Cameron, and my husband Charlie was with his brother Tim at Hayden's bedside for the last 3 days of Hayden's life, and was able to tell me that Hayden was kept comfortable, and that his end of life was peaceful. And then I was able to see my brother and sister-in-law, and I was able to see that they had not fallen through the floor, that they had not evaporated with the grief, that they had managed to shower, that they were able to laugh and smile and still take joy and parent their surviving daughter. And that the evidence that my husband brought back to me about what Hayden's end of life looked like, combined with the evidence of seeing my brother and sister-in-law still standing, really gave me the um confidence to get through the last, what turned out to be the last 5 months of my daughter's life. And I would say that the fact that we traveled that road with my brother and sister-in-law was huge. It was an exceptional experience, very unique. Most families happily don't have something devastating like that happening with multiple people in their family. But the fact that we traveled with my brother and sister-in-law made a huge difference. We were able to have conversations together about goals of care, um, which made a lot of that sort of processing was significant. We also received pediatric palliative care from our daughter's primary care pediatrician, which was something that made a huge difference. And we received grief counseling shortly after her diagnosis. And it was these three things that really I identified as having made a huge difference in how we were doing after she died. And so when I emerged from the grief cave and took stock of what had helped us and identified these three things, I ultimately decided to leave my work in public television. I was a television producer, and start the nonprofit Courageous Parents Network, which is a web and mobile platform available 24/7 for parents and providers caring for children living with serious illness. It is disease agnostic. We focus on the psychosocial and emotional issues that come with caring for a child who is living with medical complexity or serious illness. We feature over 600 short videos of parents talking about the wide range of issues, from diagnosis to working with the medical team to taking care of the other children to maintaining the adult relationship to identifying goals of care. We are always promoting the value of palliative care. We cover medical interventions like feeding tubes and spinal fusion surgery, only to the extent that we feature parents who are making decisions about this. But we don't advocate for one decision over another. It is all about finding what is right for you, what is right for your loved one. I'm sorry, there's a BB gun going on outside. You might be hearing this. I'm sorry about that. And I hope you will explore it. But it was in my travels. We interview families, as I said, with a wide range, whose children are living with a wide range of conditions. And it was through this that I met Laura and her husband Dave, and their son Alden, and their daughter Hadley. And in my interview with Laura for Courageous Parents Network, I learned Laura spoke very eloquently about how she thinks about caring for herself and where it began. And I had never heard it spoken about so logically and also spiritually. Laura brings a powerful, good, brings them both. So when ALD Connect asked if Courageous Parents Network and I could do this, I was like, well, only if Laura can do it with me, because she can talk to it so beautifully. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Laura, and in about a few seconds after this delay, you will see Laura and her son Alden and her husband Dave and daughter Hadley. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Blyth. Thanks for the introduction. Really happy to be here and able to speak to my story and hopefully share with others some, tips and tricks. I guess it's not easy. So our story begins with really many weeks of seeing subtle things that my son was or was not doing that just didn't feel quite right. and I was second guessing myself. I took him to the pediatrician. They said, oh no, he's fine. And I finally took him to the emergency room. He was admitted, and 48 hours later, we landed a life-altering diagnosis. You know, it's life-altering for him. It was life-altering for me, and really for our whole family. So Alden has a condition called polymicrogyria. This is a brain malformation that exists on a very large spectrum. We learned that day that Alden is on the very severe end of that spectrum, which likely will result in physical and cognitive disability, along with seizures that will likely become difficult to control. So this is a life-limiting illness. While holding he was 4 months old at the time, son, I learned that I would outlive him. So the neurologist did the best she can with delivering this news, but it's traumatic in its nature. So I would say the most valuable thing that she did that day was she prepped the palliative care team. So when she left the room post-diagnosis, inpatient, the palliative care team walked in. And what an amazing representation of putting palliative care first and putting the care of the whole family first. I mean, it was like this physical theater enactment of how palliative care needs to be absolutely integral at the moment of diagnosis. So the palliative care team came in and they asked me, what can we do? And I just said, I'm scared for me. And I think that perhaps could be viewed as selfish. I think a lot of people don't care for themselves because they see that as selfish. But I knew I needed to be my best self, better than the best self I had ever been before, to take on this challenge. So when a family receives a diagnosis like this, I feel like they should be receiving, all the prescriptions that come for the child, but they should get prescriptions as well for the family and for the caregivers. And so prescriptions I took the liberty of writing for myself were get a little bit of sleep every night and get out into nature and get a little exercise. And I had no appetite, but eat 3 meals a day. That was the 101 of keeping my engine running. And then beyond that, the palliative care team referred me to a grief and bereavement therapist that day. And while Alden was not imminently dying, I was certainly actively mourning the loss of the motherhood that I had imagined, along with, all those life expectations that I had already built up for this little baby boy and our family. So in the first months post-diagnosis, the uncertainty of the diagnosis was probably the most challenging thing, not knowing when would the seizures happen and what was the timing of that and what would it look like, and would he lose skills and in what time, and the anxiety surrounding that uncertainty presented for me really as nausea, untamed racing thoughts, sleeplessness, trouble concentrating. And then I was really avoiding any situation that might trigger grief for me. And I really wanted to escape and numb. To be fully honest, that might have resulted in a little bit more wine intake than is healthy. So beware. But we've survived. We're beyond that. So a couple months post-diagnosis, I really felt like I needed more. I was seeing this counselor. I didn't feel like I had all the tools I needed. And so I found a mindfulness-based resiliency training. So knowing that the life conditions had changed, that I just needed new tools in the toolbox. My Mothering 101 booklet was not working anymore. And so I leaned into mindfulness pretty aggressively. With mindfulness, you really don't need to be a, tea drinking, yoga loving meditator, but it's really just staying current in the present moment, being aware, being really accepting, radical acceptance, and staying curious and compassionate.
Laura, do you what do you say when you're so involved with you're very involved, I know now, with the polymicrogyria group, and do you talk about this with the other parents, and do you get them talking about, would they resist and say, what I'm going through is hard and I don't have time for this, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think, the idea of like becoming mindful, or is, it's like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to take one more thing on. And so I guess the way we cannot make the diagnosis pretty. We can't outthink it. We can't outmanage it. And despite my best attempts, you can't outrun it. So but you can pay attention to your mind and rebalance the attention between what is going wrong and what is going right. It's a bit like muscle memory. The thoughts that you attend to are going to strengthen. They're going to grow. And so when you're in that kind of fear-based survival mode, the thoughts that come unbidden are, what comes next? Why me? What if, and when? And that's only natural, right? We are all in this survival mode more in the last year than ever before. But to try to rebalance that, those questions are unanswerable and they really just propagate pain. And so to think about, okay, if I'm having that thought process, let's bring it back here and counter that with perhaps a question like, what will serve my child or myself in this moment? What is good in this moment?
What is good in this moment? And there is always what I love about that is because of the connection that is ever present between a parent and a child, between you and Alden, ever present, always present is the love piece, right? This beautiful, this thing that is so beautiful. That's such a trite way to describe it, but is like the truest thing in the whole world is the love a parent has for their child. And it's the most profound thing too. And that is always present. And it is actually because of that, there is so much pain around the physical, the anticipating your child's struggle or suffering, and the anxiety about making good decisions, and then worrying that the possibility that your child will die and that you'll have to live through that. That's the flip side of the love. And if you can turn away from the fear and focus on the love, which, if there's fear, there's love. Where there's fear, it means there's love. So,
and where there's joy, there's sorrow. And they're so linked. They're so linked. And you just have to kind of breathe through that sorrow and get to the joy. Breathe through the fear, get to the love. And you cannot escape one, but you can lean into the other.
Laura, can you talk about how you and Dave, Alden's father, your husband, are, or whether you and Dave are or are not in sync around this? Like, does he have practice? Do you talk with him about this? You ask him to help take care of you or to help you take care of yourself, and vice versa?
It has been a learning curve for both of us. I think that we had a great marriage. We had a really solid foundation, and this really shook it and will continue to shake it as new challenges come up. We have proactively actually sought out a marriage coach. We use the word coach. It's much more attractive to the male. Hint, hint for any women out there. But, so early days, I think the biggest lesson for me has been that no two people grieve at the same time on the same timeline, and that no two people have the same process. And so initially that felt really isolating and very lonely. I grieved much more aggressively right up front, and he couldn't be there with me for that in the same place. And he also couldn't be my strength. He was, a pillar next to me, also crumbling. And so we needed outside help to keep the structure of the building up. He had no issue going and being social, seeing other kids Alden's age, running around, hitting their age appropriate milestones. But that was way too painful for me, at least initially. So, instead of, again, that fear-based mindset, instead of going into the like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to be social again, what does this mean for my life? I just had to be aware that there were some situations, social situations, that had to be temporarily, didn't serve me, and accept that for myself with compassion. I think it was a healthy boundary. And another boundary that I came up for myself was fully stepping off of social media for many months, and that was really healthy. I thought I would never go back, and then I went back, and right now it's bringing some positive energy into my life that may not be always true again. So boundaries are certainly a form of self-care. They don't need to be permanent, but respecting what's best for me now has been really important. Let's see, my husband and I, so we really couldn't connect through the deep grief. I was much more of a sob story than he was. And we just had very different processing of that, but we did find ways to connect really powerfully, fully, actually, through positivity. So we started a new practice a couple months post-diagnosis that has served us so well. So just before bed, we turn to each other and say 5 things that we're grateful for that day. And even on the worst day, there are 5, I promise. They can be really simple. The more specific, the better. And, it's what went right, what was warm, what was engaging, what was meaningful. And, we were training ourselves subtly every day in mindfulness awareness, in positivity, and recreating, a compassionate connection in a positive light. So I guess life is so precious and so finite. And we can make this time so beautiful. And, we just need to focus on what is meaningful. We can continue to celebrate the life that is our baby boy. And when our son is gone, we will find ways to celebrate the life that was with him. And all we can do here and now is serve and attend to ourselves and our loved ones, and to this beautiful being that is a wonderful visitor in our life, as all people are. And so really, by caring for ourselves, we can do that. We can care for them.
One of the things that I really appreciate what you're saying for you is, my daughter died 20 years ago this month. And so that's been a long time, is that I think that the practices that you're talking about, Laura, will help you remember better. I think when we are taking care of ourselves, whatever that looks like, whether it's not distracting ourselves with social media or numbing activities, and we all can use a good movie and a good glass of wine every now and then. So this is not to take away from that, but when we're not numbing ourselves, or when we are paying attention and when we are in our body, we remember better. Or the memories go in and are more likely to stay there. And as someone who is now 53 years old, And so I have my own issues with memory that may have nothing to do with just habit. I wish I remembered more. And I think that what you're talking about is a gift you're giving your future self. I really do. You have some, I'm looking at this question from Kelly. I want to get to some of your other strategies, but this is a hard topic for many of our families who are in the monitoring phase. They live in fear. Yes. Yes. So when you are not certain whether this is coming, Laura, you talk about uncertainty, living with uncertainty, because while you know that Alden has polymicrogyria, you aren't certain. They can't tell you how it is going to unfold for him. So how do you live? What would you say about the uncertainty piece?
Well, I'd first acknowledge it's a really hard place to be. And that discomfort is very real, and forgive yourself for being, stressed out about it. I guess thinking about, we can only manage things that are today, right? And it's simpler. So I would say take it day by day. Be kind to yourself, but as much as we can rein in our thoughts, and perhaps what we've done in our family is set a 6-month mark where we only talk about Alden and his development and his needs 6 months out at any time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't discuss him 2 years from now. And that's been really healthy for us. It's also been a really healthy guide that actually I learned from the CPN grandparents column, because it was the grandparents who kept asking, what are you going to do when he goes to college or something? And it's like, he's not going to college, but like, also just don't ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think a lot of it, I am not a religious person, I'm a spiritual person, but I think some of it's having faith in yourself and trust yourself. So you were, strong enough to care for your child yesterday, and you can trust that you're strong enough to care for your child and family today. And, from that, you can extrapolate that you will be able to take on this next big thing. And I think that so much of that is leaning into building your strength. And what does that look like for each individual, I think is different. I think a lot of it is just leaning into what, healthy habits for yourself. Finding time every day, a couple minutes here and there to fill your own cup. Certainly the health and well-being 101, but add a little bit extra in.
Yeah. I would also say that worrying about the future and worrying about something that hasn't happened yet and may not happen, and I appreciate that this is a lot easier said than done, is what I need to memorize this quote, and I should look it up, but like when you worry about something, it gets you twice. It takes away the moment that you're in because it burdens the moment with worry, and if it happens, then the thing you worry about, it's gotten you a second time, and if it doesn't happen, it's ruined the moment. So there's nothing good comes from worrying about something that may or may not happen. But it's natural, but it's just at its core, it's impractical, right? It's impractical. It's not helping you in the moment to worry about something that hasn't happened yet and may not happen. I'm living that right now with my husband because he's in treatment for prostate cancer, and the treatment he's receiving will may or may not work And we won't know for 18 months whether it's worked. So for 18 months, we have to wonder whether this thing that he was affected pretty young, so it's not good news. But like for 18 months, we have to live with not knowing what we're going to find out on the other side of that. And he's doing a lot of mindfulness stuff to keep focused on where we are now. Because in fact, there are no guarantees. We know that, right? Like I think one of the things I found for the parents is like one of the things that's helped us is like, once you have this difficult thing happen to your child, it makes you aware that difficult things could happen all the time. And then you realize, oh, but that doesn't help me. Like I do a really good job of not worrying about what's happening to my other children, right? Like I don't wake up every day hoping that they don't have an accident. She said, knocking on wood, because that's an impractical way to go through my life, is not worrying that my grown children are going to have an accident today, or develop an illness. Like that doesn't help me. So I just don't think about it. And it's a little bit of that, I think. That was a ramble.
I do think mindfulness is like the bread and butter of, if you have a mind that is like racing again and again, unbidden to a place of worry about things that you have no control over, finding a mindfulness practice that works for you it's like going to the gym so you can lift a heavy box. Like you just got to do it. And so for thinking about a couple like mindfulness strategies, it doesn't have to be that like, clear your mind, don't think of anything. It's like that is impossible. That is impossible. And it is really impossible if you're a parent or a caregiver for somebody who's ill. But just realizing there's a power in sitting and realizing that your thoughts are not you, and you can see them pass and choose to not engage with them, or choose to engage with them briefly and then let them go. And there really is a strength building that can occur there that is really powerful and will completely, it changes your life inside the diagnosis realm, and then it will change your life at work and all these other realms. Other nice ways to try to access mindfulness space are, there are a lot of apps out there that are great. And then there's most of the apps you have to pay for. There's YouTube, meditation, like guided meditation is a really nice place to start, because it kind of keeps you're like, oh, I'm thinking about something else again, but forgive that, that's okay. But you just keep coming back. And that act of like, oh gosh, I was thinking about that again, and coming back to it that's the training. That's the training. It's not clearing your mind. It's the, oh gosh, I was thinking again. And I actually think Tara Brock, actually Blyth, you introduced me to her. She has an amazing podcast that has gorgeous like 20-minute meditations that are a great thing to do in bed if you can't fall asleep. Maybe I'll put her into the chat. And if you're thinking about other kids in your family and how to support them, there are a lot of mindfulness books out there for siblings. There's a good one called Breathe Like a Bear. And you can Amazon search mindfulness books, and there are a lot out there. But even the Breathe Like a Bear, it's a lot of breathing meditations, and I do it with my daughter, and I'm like, this is valuable for me too. And then I think other ways to access mindfulness and stay in the present moment is writing, trying to write about the present moment, and humor. You cannot be laughing and be thinking about 6 months out. Wow, it's so valuable. And I never thought I would laugh again post-diagnosis. Somebody asked about multiple caregivers. You might be better at fielding the guilt question.
I want to talk about the guilt thing for a minute. I don't know. Well, I'll speak to this myself, because both my husband and I gave our daughter the gene in order for her to have Tay-Sachs. We both had to give it to her, and we did. I will tell you, we did not have any guilt. And the reason we didn't have any guilt I mean, I know families in the Tay-Sachs community who do experience guilt, but the reason I felt that I didn't have any guilt was because I didn't know I was a carrier. I had no knowledge of this, nor did my husband. And we didn't know to even go get tested. It was not in our family history. So we didn't opt out of carrier testing or carrier screening. So we were innocent victims, just like our daughter. So that's why we didn't have any guilt. And then we did have family members go get tested. One branch of my family did not go get tested. And I thought they were crazy and it made me sad, but I can't worry about what's happening over here. That's their line, their choice. And I just focused on my own branch and advocated as best I could, and then let it go. And then I do know a lot of families not a lot of families, some families in the Tay-Sachs community have done IVF. And I think if anybody is judging anybody who's been in this situation, they obviously don't know what they don't know what it's like to be you. And I would just, we don't have time or space to absorb the negative energy of other people. We just don't. And I learned of an expression called bless and release. Be like, okay, bless you, goodbye. Just like, hello, goodbye. I have no bandwidth for you. So that's what I would say to that comment. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to speak to, if there are like the whole family dynamic, right?
Yes.
And we have in our family, we have Alden at the center of this, and his sister, and then we're the parents. And so there's a beautiful ring theory that I first learned about through reading Option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. But the original theory was by a woman named Sarah Silk. And so this ring theory is basically at the center of the trauma or the diagnosis or whatever it is the person. And then in rings going out are people who are affected by it. So, Dave and I are at the center there, and then our parents, and then probably our siblings, and then some very close friends, and then some not so close friends. Doctors are somewhere in the middle, perhaps, but and we should be supporting people who are a circle smaller than us and only seeking support from people who are a circle bigger than us. And so, I know that right after that diagnosis, actually, my husband and I were living with my parents. And so we had 4 adults who were all trying to grapple with and grieve this new found reality. And it was messy because, we everybody was supporting everybody and everybody was falling down. And so I think it's nice to kind of respect, those boundaries. And if there's somebody who's on an outer rim for you that's seeking support from you, I would acknowledge that, at least for yourself, or have a confrontation with them, and kindly ask them to seek support elsewhere, or put their judgment elsewhere.
Yeah. I am another mom that in the network, we did a conversation with her and her mother, so the mother and grandmother, and the grandmother talked about how she felt, I don't think she knew the ring theory, but she spent her time giving her love into her daughter, and she went to her girlfriends for support. Her thing was, I have to make sure my daughter never sees me cry. And you can have a theory about that or not. I think I did see my mother cry, not a lot, and it was never about her. It was about her sadness for me. And then I knew my mother was getting help from her community and her friends, and she didn't lean on me to help her get through this. I'm mindful of the time, and I want to see if there are any more questions from before we time out. Happens to be Laura's birthday, so she has to get to, I know her family is eager to celebrate her birthday with her. And I also gather that you guys have likely been on this Zoom for a long time, and self-care suggests that one can only take so much Zoom in a day. So should we have, are there any more questions? I don't know, Kelly, if there's anything else you want to ask. And Laura, is there anything you want to make that you haven't said that you feel strongly about imparting to people?
Oh gosh, I mean, I don't have any. I just think, you know, our love for our children is amazing, and that's something to absolutely lean into. And, you know, I think that love goes hand in hand, the ability for us to show up and show our love consistently to our child, any siblings, you know, any partners in caring, is 100% dependent on being present for ourselves. So, as you know, just going back to that original statement of, it is not selfish to be showing up for yourself and finding ways to make that work for you.
And
Do
here's
you have any advice for how to approach loved ones who you feel need to practice mindfulness?
Modeling, model. I think modeling. I'm well. You have more to say that, but my husband modeled it before, and I was like, "Ooh, I want what he's having." He didn't tell me I needed to be doing it. He just started doing it. I was like, "Oh, that's clearly serving you well." So it was sort of my tip would be model.
Model is good. If the people you're thinking of are readers, or perhaps you know, could act, you know, if they don't want to hear from you but could access written material, I think there are a lot of great books on, you know, that are really accessible. Option B is one of them. That's not, you know, it's not a sob story, and it's not a self-help book, but it offers some kind of mindfulness techniques and kind of interesting frameworks. And yeah, certainly saying, I have a 30-day free pass to my new, you know, Headspace app. Can I send it to you? But you know, people have to find this for themselves and find which practice works for themselves. And, you know, I think we haven't talked enough about writing. I think writing is a really powerful tool. It doesn't need to be a daily journal, but one person mentioned that they're, you know, talked about guilt, and I would sit down and write for 20 minutes about that. See what comes up, you know, lean into that feeling and see what comes up. And, you know, if it continues, you know, engage a professional to talk about what you've written down with you. And then the resiliency course, there are so many out there. The one I did is through the Henry Benson Institute. I can write it into the chat box, called the Stress Management and Resiliency Training. And all of these are online now. So, and it was once a week. I think it was 2 hours for 8 weeks. I think there's a big range of price. A lot of them, if you get into a healthcare system, like I'm from Boston, so if you're involved, if you are a patient at MGH, it can be something that is, you know, paid for by insurance. So let's see, I'll type it in here.
If you type that in, and you know, Laura mentioned Tara Brach. She and I both listen to this podcast, which allows me to walk and listen. And so it feels sort of like a double whammy of goodness. I'm walking, I'm not running. My form of self-care was to give up running. I was like, I don't like running, so I stopped. I walk a lot, and I listen to podcasts, and that is a form. And a lot of her podcasts are about building, you know, spirituality and peace and mindfulness, and all of which build towards resiliency. So that's another
I
thing.
think finding a group of like-minded individuals who are going through something fairly similar is incredibly helpful. It doesn't need to be the same diagnosis, but some of the same kind of tough, um, you know, caregiving issues. It's just somewhere safe to kind of bring that darkness out and know that it's seen and respected, and that people can bear witness to you. I think that I've found polymicrogyria has a support group. I'm not sure if your community does. Somebody could certainly start it if they don't. But there are a lot of options out there. I just joined Clubhouse. It's a new app that has rare disease parenting groups that just happen to meet multiple times a week, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna try that. And kind of finding your tribe, because this, as you guys all know, the same people who used to support you, that relationship looks a little bit different because your life has changed quite a bit. So finding some new supports, whether they're formal or informal. Oh, that's great. Monthly community calls. That's excellent.
Yeah.
You got to find somebody who's presenting mindfulness in those calls. Maybe put a little homework assignment in at the end of the call. Everybody has to come up with a mantra for the next call.
I do hope that you will go to courageousparentsnetwork.org. We have a section called Taking Care of Yourself, with parents talking about different strategies, some providers talking about things. A mini series on writing as healing. There's a mom leading a yoga. There's a mindful meditation teacher who does a few yoga and meditations on CPN. And of course, there are a lot of things that are available on YouTube, as Laura said. So without even having to pay anything, you can find stuff. And I think, the key is find what feels right for you so that you stick with it. Otherwise you won't sustain. And another twist for just that I'll leave in closing is that research has shown that the well-being of the children is entirely dependent on the well-being of the parents. So it is in fact 100% in your child's best interest for you to take care of yourself. So I think that's it. And Laura's going to go eat her cake. And I'm going to thank Laura. Thank you so much. To all of you in the ALD Connect community. Thank you for your inviting the opportunity to be here. I'm sorry you have occasion to be here, but I'm glad you have this community of support. And stay well and take care of yourself. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.